Right, let's kick off. Hi, everyone, to people that have joined. Welcome to our webinar series. I'm joined by Russell today. Hi, Russell.
Hey guys.
We have about 30 minutes today, so we'll be digging into the use of tools for productivity with the goal to move you from what might currently feel like chaos, and actually ending this session with a bit of clarity. So we do have time for questions at the end, but if we don't manage to get back to everyone, we will get back to you separately. So before we kick off, I'm Molly. Nice to meet everyone. Russell, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I'm Russell. I'm a senior consultant at Sisua. I'm actually just a specialist in Monday.com implementation. So that's what the focus of this sort of webinar is going to be. Well, those kinds of tools, basically, because all these things that we talk about are going to be applicable for all of that. Yeah. So thanks, Molly. Yeah, I guess we sort of put this webinar together just to kind of help people think about the people side of implementing a system like this. Like, so if you are someone that thinks that this would be a beneficial system, some of the things that you probably need to think about before you implement one of these tools. But also, if you're someone that actually is using one of these tools or have gone through that process and you're finding trouble and problem with people adopting it, yeah, I've just got some suggestions and some food for thought, really.
Great. So if we start, so for the people that are listening and potentially feeling like a change is needed and a tool might be the answer, what are some of the challenges that they might be experiencing to indicate that a tool is needed?
Yeah, I suppose before we sort of jump into that specifically, I think giving a sense of the key areas that you need to sort of we're going to look at, right? So you need to understand why you're implementing the tool. If you then understand why you're implementing the tool, you need to then prepare for that change, right? So that's going to impact your people in a pretty profound way, right? If you're going from one completely different system to one that is a bit more integrated, cloud-based, all of that kind of stuff. Um, there will be a messy middle once you push that button and make it go live, and there will be trouble ahead. You can't avoid it. And then you need to provision for the long-term change. So I think I found this quote actually that I thought was really a good way to frame what we're talking about from Robin Sharma, which is change is hard at first, messy in the middle, but gorgeous at the end, right? So I think it's a good, looking at this, it's a good framework for what we're going to talk through today. But sorry, remind me of your question, Molly. You were saying what
Yeah,
people
if
should.
yeah, and I think if people are listening to this and they're thinking, something feels quite chaotic, people feel quite confused. What are they likely to see to indicate that a tool might be needed?
Yeah, so I guess it comes to that first point, right? Which is what problems are you actually trying to solve? You know, how do you know that you should start thinking about implementing something like Monday.com or Asana or something like that, rather than using what most people use, which is Microsoft Office Suite stuff. So I put together this slide, which is kind of highlights some of the consistent stuff that you see, right? I think the quote at the top left feels like we picked the tool before we even knew the problem.
Mm.
That is so common. People get caught up in the marketing of these things, and these companies are very good at marketing their tools, right? And they seem like an amazing thing that's going to fix everything. And you're going to push a button, and everyone's suddenly going to, collaborate, and all my data is going to be in one place. But ultimately, transitioning to that can happen, but transitioning to that place is a massive people thing, right? So some of the things to look at are, do you have a lack of visibility? I think, do you feel like if you're making decisions based on how you feel things are going, rather than actually having meaningful data that you can access anytime you want it? Everyone knows that obviously once you create a report, essentially it's out of date as soon as it's created, right? So there's an element where if you've got data that you can access whenever you want to, that's really powerful, but also just having everything in one place, easily accessible. So lack of visibility is one. Big one is siloed teams and teams not talking to each other, right? So if you've got teams that are working on similar projects or initiatives, and ultimately someone's putting their hand up saying, "Hey, I didn't know you were working on that. What? How? Well, we've already done all this work over here. What? A good
Yeah.
example is I was working on a client implementing Monday.com, and there were two teams that were working on one project. Um, and they just weren't collaborating, and they were literally about three desks apart. They had no idea what each other were doing, but they were ultimately working on similar parts of the problem. So I created a dashboard that combined their respective areas into one place, and then said, hey guys, look, why don't we join together and have a conversation about this? And honestly, by the end of the session, they were literally like beaming and going, check us out. We're like collaborating. This is insane, because they're just not used to it, right? And the knowledge element too, right? That's another one where I think a lot of places, they have people that hold all the knowledge. And there's a real risk with that, because obviously if those people then move on to something else or whatever, suddenly you lose all that knowledge and you're in a bit of a funk. And just going through the last two relatively quickly, no single source of truth. So it kind of comes back to the lack of visibility thing. If you have a lot of situations where people are like, what's the latest version of this document? Who's working, and that tends to happen. Whereas actually, if you've got everyone working off the same hymn sheet, you're way more effective. And the conversations you're having, you're not having those frustrating conversations. You're actually talking about the work and talking about what needs to be done. And then, the last thing, I suppose, is the heavy manual lifting, right? If you've got lots of tools and templates that are, in Excel and all of that kind of stuff, you end up doing a lot of copy and paste rather than actually doing your job. So I guess those are the sorts of things that would be a signifier to me if you wanted to start thinking about using one of these tools, right? And if you are using one of these tools, it might be worth going back to the start and saying, and if you're not having a good time with it, saying, well, what actually were you trying to solve with this? And it will kind of take you back to that base level of like, let's simplify it and go from there.
And it sounds like even some of the sentences you've just said, I've definitely heard before. People say, oh, I didn't realize we had that tool, or can I have metrics in 5 minutes time? And they're like, oh gosh, I need to go away and find them, and it can take days for them to find all of these different metrics, or what version of document are we looking at? All of these sentences that people probably hear day to day could be an indicator of the fact that the tool isn't working effectively, or they might need a tool. And if some of these are fixed, I can see you've got at the bottom, what are people likely to see?
So ultimately, if everyone sort of adopts the tool, right, wholeheartedly, and we'll talk a bit about some of the challenges about doing that a bit later, but ultimately, if they do, then you have a very streamlined structure when they're talking to each other, there's no hidden information, there's no there's less confusion, right? So on the lack of visibility, you can see on this sort of future state, reporting is effortless, decisions are faster, so you can actually make real decisions rather than having to sort of guess or just sort of bet on this being the right thing that we move towards. Teams are talking to each other. That's a big one, that they actually collaborate and they all have the access to the same information, which is always good. Centralized place for your data, it's a given. I know that obviously SharePoint is a good example of that, but even then sometimes that can be tricky with people not necessarily using it in the right way. And then that sort of, team spending all their time doing admin stuff. And it's just not a good use of time, basically.
Yeah. And going back to your why, so say someone decides to go for it and they think, we're really clear on why we need a tool. What should they think about before pressing go?
Sure. I suppose that kind of goes into the next topic that we're going to talk about. And again, looking at this quote on the top left, which is, this feels like it was designed by someone who's never done my job. And that is something that I've heard a lot, quite a few times if I've come into it where it's already been implemented. So there's a massive people element to implementing any of these tools, ultimately because they are designed for people to use and improve their efficiency and their collaboration and all of that kind of stuff. So I've just put together some thoughts, right? It's just kind of food for thought around, if you are looking to go on this journey, what to think about. So, firstly, like, who is this really for? Is it for, leadership to say, oh, we implemented this awesome tool and now, pat ourselves on the back? Or is it actually to improve the day-to-day workings and lives of the people who are using it, right? So if you're building, those tools around just like the actual process itself rather than what people do on a day-to-day basis, that you can kind of have trouble. Um, Involving people early in the conversations around how to set up the tool, in what tool to get, all of that kind of stuff based on actual knowledge of their day to day, that is huge. Like the more that
Mm.
you can actually involve people early and have those conversations and bring them on that journey with you, get them to input into the design of it, get them to input as much as possible, then they will feel way more bought in to what you're actually trying to get them to use. And it will be more effective ultimately because you've listened to how, what their day to day is and how they work, right? So you can make it way more effective. And that again plays into that, will this make their day easier? Will it add extra work, or actually, if it was done right, will this genuinely improve the sort of day-to-day runnings of what they have to do on a day-to-day basis? Yeah, and the last point I put actually was, it says the power of change agents or advocates, right? So in change management, for those who aren't sort of familiar, a change agent is someone that essentially is like an advocate of that change, but is sort of embedded within the company, right? So say if I came in to help implement Monday.com, for example, I would probably put together a team of people who are like permanent members of staff of that company and say, look, we're going to be the change agent team, or whatever it would be, or someone that essentially, usually those people are pretty good if they understand the inner workings of like most people, but they also have some influence as well. So like delivery managers, managers who are managing teams of other project managers or whatever. They're really good people to use as change agents because they'll actually help drive that change for you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and the last point I say is good communication, early and good communication. Yeah, and lots of it. Yeah.
Mm. And you said a good point a second ago around, often the decision makers to a tool like this might be LT team, might be quite
Hmm.
senior team. And how important is it for them to be invested in this and be advocates, on your change agent point?
Yeah, it's such a big deal. It really is, because ultimately, if a lot of these changes, you'll come into a situation where some of the people you're working with may have seen two or three of these implementation systems already, so they may be
Yeah.
a bit jaded. And ultimately, say you have a senior leader or a director or something like that, something like if they are presenting something at an all hands call or something like that, and you're
Mm.
seeing them navigate the tool and use it effectively, it seems like a small thing, but it's really powerful. Just to show that actually we're all embracing this, we're all using it, and look, even the senior leadership are actually embracing it, using it on a day-to-day basis. The amount of times that I've basically been into one of those senior leadership meetings and they're all starting to revert back to like PowerPoints and Word documents to do their presentations, even though
Yeah.
everyone else is using Monday.com or Asana or whatever it is. Yeah, it happens a lot. So if you can kind of find a way for the leadership to be more involved in that, it has a huge impact.
Mm. And even with this, and I don't know whether you've seen it on clients, but it is like this is a change, and change
Mm,
can be challenging to people. And I think leaning into that and actually using it as opportunity to get feedback, to understand what people are struggling with, and really acknowledge that it might feel a bit messy and it might feel frustrating because it is a change, but that's okay. And actually, the longer term benefits that we're going to get from this is what's important.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think accepting that people will have an element of resistance to it, right? And that is normal, and that
Yeah.
the only thing that you got to make sure that you do with all of that is you listen, and you
Mm.
genuinely listen. You don't just say, "Oh yeah, feedback into this form and we'll get back to you." It's like, no, genuinely listen to people's concerns and their frustrations, and have mechanisms set up so you
Mm.
can listen to them and then take action on that. A lot of people, a surefire way to get people disengaged and a bit jaded about the thing is to say, yeah, 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 we're listening, we're listening, we're listening, and
Mm.
then nothing happens, right?
Mm.
Even if you can't sort of implement everything that they're looking for you to do, or it's not feasible, at least communicating that and saying, but we have done this, we're working on this, and again, it comes back to that change agent point. Whereas if you're working with them
Mm.
and listening to them and kind of having that, all of that flow of information and people all talking about it in the same way, and keeping the positivity, even if there are challenges and it's not quite right straight away,
Mm.
it's really, really powerful. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so say we've launched,
Hmm.
what kind of issues can crop up after that?
So yeah, I named this slide "Expect some pain." You're not going to grab something off the shelf, push the button, and everyone's going to go, "Thank you so much. This has saved my life, and this is the best thing I have
Would be
ever
nice.
used, well, I've ever used." And yeah, great, easy. I'm using it now, and everything's fine. It's just not. It's not. It's not going to happen, basically. So there are a few things. There's loads of things that you could talk about here, but I picked out some of the key ones that I think that you should just be aware of. Right, is that the novelty wearing off. Though once you push that button, it's a shiny new toy. People are coming in, they're using it, they're setting stuff up, they're engaging with it more often. But then when things get busy or you're putting more pressure into the system, there's always the risk that they start reverting back to their old habits, right? So again, communication is important, having mechanisms set up where you're sort of calling out where people are using it in really good ways. Having support mechanisms is also really important too. So if someone's really struggling, they've got somewhere to go. And being really open. I think this is a really important one.
Mm.
Always having a sense whenever you're helping people with this stuff or implementing it, there are no stupid questions. And I always refer to this, if I whenever I've done training sessions on any of these systems, I just say, look, you can ask a stupid question 20 times, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because if people start feeling like they can't engage with the material or they can't do it, that's when they'll either silently resist, which we'll talk about in a second, or they sort of just completely disengage from the thing or get very stressed, and it can cause other problems. So yeah, so I think engaging with people in that way, and then again, some of the other things to look at is I put in exclamation marks there. Silent resistance sets in. Watch the quiet ones. Yeah, for sure. Right? You think, oh, great, they've got it. Yeah, sweet. I don't have to worry about those people. Generally, the people that speak the least or communicate the least are the ones that are actually going to cause you the most problems, in my experience.
Mhm.
Right? They're either completely disengaged, or sometimes behind the scenes that they are being resistant, or and that can bleed out into to
Mm.
the people around them, and it can cause problems. So if you do see people that are very disengaged or very quiet, make an extra effort to connect with them in a compassionate way, but be like, hey, just I realized that you didn't have any questions on this. Do you
Yeah.
want to grab some time separately and we can talk about it? Because a lot of people are not really confident with being in workshops or anything like that. So setting up smaller groups or one-to-ones and things like that can help a lot. Yeah. um, and then the other two, I mean, we already talked about the leaders not walking the talk. Information overload, and this almost goes back to what we talked about why you're actually implementing one of these systems, right? Just don't overcomplicate it. If you really know how people are using it in the day to day, just start really simple by taking some of those day to day tasks, right, and building them in a system, uh, in a way that works, and test it. And then just once that's working, then you can start getting excited. I think that's where it comes back to the marketing piece, where it's like, look at this, you can click this thing and they collaborate here. Da, 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 da. And if you just take that and you give it to a whole lot of people, it's like, especially if they're not used to using tools like this, or they're, depending on where their situation is, it can be super overwhelming,
Mm.
and it can take a lot of time, and they might already be busy with their other work stuff. And so I think if you can just be like, right guys, we're just going to do these things and we're going to do them well, and that'll be phase
Mm.
one. And then
Yeah.
maybe look at phase two, which could be, okay, great, now that you're using it and using it effectively and we've ironed out the kinks in that, let's look at maybe doing something a little bit more automated or elaborate or whatever it
Mm.
is that you can do. So yeah, these are just some things that you probably will experience once you push that button and everyone's starting to use the tool.
Mm. And it sounds like this, big element of this is this behavioral change piece and this
Yeah.
mindset piece. And you've got a few words there around, a lot of it sounds like consistency, momentum, support, openness, and having, whether it's your change agents or someone to really drive this project, not just implement it and say, everyone go away and use it, but actually having that person to develop these behaviors and make sure
Mm,
that they are consistent.
mm,
How is that, how important is that from a
mm.
more mindset perspective.
Yeah, it's really important. And it comes back to a sort of communication piece too, because,
Yeah.
if you're working in a team, you sort of look to your leadership and you look to other people around you as to like what where we're going with it and how they're using it and all that kind of stuff. So if those, you have those change agents or, advocates or whatever you want to call them, if they're really bought in, um, then then ultimately everyone else kind of is along on that journey too. They're
Mm.
excited and they want to engage with it, and they, because they know that person gets their job and gets the frustrations with what their current role is. And so if that person's saying, actually, this thing's great, then ultimately there's a higher chance that they'll be more inclined to adopt it and kind of engage with it in the right way. Yeah.
Okay. And with this then, so what would you say, what does success look like if this is truly embedded correctly?
Yeah, I'd say so. Looking at so I didn't want this whole webinar to just be negative, right? I think that these tools are great, and when they're embedded right, and when everyone's engaged with them, and you've gone through some of that pain, and you've done it in a strategic and structured way, so you're starting simple, you can actually get to a place where people are using it as their
Mm.
day-to-day work tool, and that's quite powerful when that happens and it becomes a cultural shift, right? I remember an example where I had a delivery manager who had about 20 project managers that she was managing, and she was initially very skeptical about tools. She'd been through some of these systems before, um, but also she was very influential in the team that I was embedding the tool with. So I knew that I had to really spend some time working with her to kind of get her on board and get it through. So by the time we'd finished, so I got her to input in all the tools we were creating for her team and the training side of things, and she was just like there every step of the way. I remember, and this was a big deal because she didn't do this often, but she ultimately put out a message to the team saying this, that the information that we'd done had been really, really great, and
Mm.
that this tool's actually improving what we're doing. This is amazing, right? And this is someone that's usually quite scathing and usually quite
Mm.
pessimistic and whatever. And then she'd adopted it, and ultimately her team was starting to engage with it really well. And that feeds up, that
Yeah.
feeds up into the, and then other teams start seeing that and start hearing that and whatever. But it's choosing where you put your energy. So people like that are really, really useful. So I guess what I've done here is put together a list of, things. If you were to take away a few things from this webinar, these are the things I think would be useful, right? So again, that top one's really powerful, which is this is not a one-time event, right? And this
Mm.
applies to not just these systems, other systems in general. It's a culture shift. So if you don't see it in that way, you're asking for pain down the line. You just
Yeah.
are. It's inevitable. The continuous feedback thing. Don't be afraid of feedback. If you ask for feedback and you just get a deluge of negative feedback, that's very powerful information. Don't hide from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Rewarding good usage is good. Adapting the system to fit people. Again, we talked about that earlier on, the leadership consistency thing. We just been talking about the investing in champions and ongoing training. Measuring what matters, I think that's also a good one. We haven't actually talked about that too much,
Mm.
but when you are looking at how effective this is, really think about what you're actually measuring. Is it the satisfaction of your team? Is it, their effectiveness? Is it their, the amount of time they're spending working on specific tasks? Think about what your key success factors are, but don't neglect the people element of those success factors either. So
Mm.
there's a sort of two-pronged approach to it, which I think, and then yeah, letting it grow with you. So not seeing it as this rigid, and that's the benefit of some of these tools is they are quite malleable if you know how to, sort of set them up and adjust them and get them working for what you need to do. They're kind of like Lego blocks in a way compared to some of the more rigid MS Office type stuff,
Yeah.
or old school, I suppose you could call it. So you can kind of, once you've got that simple base set up, then you can get quite creative and let the tool actually start to evolve and fill in some of those gaps. And with automation and various other ways that you can have managing your work, it can become great. I mean, we had a situation where we linked a whole lot of boards together and created automations, which basically meant that the amount of time that the team spent putting together highlight reports and all of that over halved in terms of time. It probably spent like a quarter of time actually doing the reporting side of things per month.
Yeah.
And that's where you see those little light bulbs and the little twinkle in people's eye with these things, because you actually see a very quick benefit to their working day, or yeah.
And I think even, the point of this sounds like it's to remove the need for this decision making, whether it's, how am I spending my day to day?
Mm,
What decision do we need to make about a project? Actually, if you're using these tools effectively, it removes that need to make these decisions because you've got a really informed view and a cohesive view and quite a collaborative view, which then allows people to spend less time thinking about that in their mind and actually doing the task that's important.
yeah.
I love your quote. Now you found a rhythm, I can't imagine going back.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where you want to
Um,
get to, right? Is people are
yeah,
just like, God, I can't believe we used to do it that way. You know what I mean? That's
yeah.
where, like, we used to actually, write reports and copy and paste into, and it's like, yeah, once they've actually seen the promised land and it actually works, that's the thing, then people are a lot more positive about it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we essentially this session was to just give you a bit of knowledge on
Yeah.
what bad looks like, what success could look like, some things to think about. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, I've got a tool, but I'm not getting the benefits that we've been talking about, or we haven't got a tool, but it seems like something that we might need. Russell, what do you advise people doing next? Like, how can you help?
Yeah, I suppose that, if you're in that position, and you want to talk about it more, then just get in touch with us.
Mm.
There's other people that have experience implementing this stuff within Sisua. Either ping us on LinkedIn, or, through our website. Just go to sisua.co.uk and there's a contact form on there. And, we'd be absolutely happy to just jump on a call and talk about what you're struggling with, and see if there's any way that you can help you out, even if it's just giving some advice or some examples of where we may have done similar stuff in the past. Yeah.
Great. We do actually have a couple of minutes left.
Cool.
Don't know in the chat if anyone does have any questions. We might have some silent resistors, as you called them.
Well, I suppose if there aren't any questions, then if people, as I say, feel free to sort of message us directly on LinkedIn or anything like that. If you do have any follow up, if you do think there are things in here that would that you'd like to know more about or know about more about us, then obviously we're definitely up for talking about it more.
Great. Well, thank you, Russell. It's nice
Thanks,
to
Molly.
chat.
Yeah, it was nice to chat. Yeah, nice way to spend the afternoon.
Thanks everyone for joining. And
Cool.
yeah, we'll speak to you all soon.
Cool.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.